Hey everyone, my name is Ophir Penso and I'm the Global Director of Channel Partnerships at monday.com. Today, I want us to talk about how distributed work became the new norm of how organizations are operating today, and share some insight on what leadership principles at monday.com to quickly transform and perform during the time of global transition that really changed the way organizations work today. So with no further ado, let me start with quickly introducing myself. So my name is Ophir Penso. I'm based in Tel Aviv, Israel, which is where the monday.com headquarters is located. Throughout my career, I've managed companies and organizations from different sizes and different business segments, through military to operational companies, and then in the last 7 years, focusing on tech sales. I joined monday.com when we were roughly 50 employees and grew in the company from 50 to 700 employees globally that we have today. I'm leading a $20 million operation and over than 20 people, which are all distributed across 8 cities in 5 different countries. So I'm very much familiar with managing distributed teams, but also for Monday, it wasn't always the case. We also were a company that was focusing on mainly hiring people in the same centralized office. So let me take you in our journey, and starting from the last 7 months. So in February 2020, you can see this map view in which we represent how the employees distribution of monday.com looks like. We were mainly hiring people in our 2 main offices, in Tel Aviv, in New York. The company was 380 people, and the majority of them were in Tel Aviv, with 280 of them sitting in Tel Aviv, and then another 100 sitting in New York. And we manage our global business from those 2 offices directly. Although we had a global business in South America, North America, and across the whole Europe and APAC, we really tried to hire people really nearby our offices. Only 5% of our employees were remote, and we were managing our business directly from those offices. But then, COVID happened. And basically, COVID changed the way organizations think about hiring and managing people. And as part of the efforts to stop the global pandemic, we were introduced with a social distancing model. In that model that started to pop all over the media, you can see that the Gauss bill described the impact of social distancing and the big difference between how, when we don't do distancing, what the impacts on the outbreak versus when we are doing distancing, and how we can really help our health system to meet the capacity of how they can take care of the people that were the patients of the pandemic. So as part of helping the world globally to really face the pandemic, organizations worldwide started to move their employees to remote work. And even a company like Monday, that again, if I will go back to our map view, that we were very centralized in our offices, although we managed a global business. So 7 months ago, we were very centralized, but if I will take you fast forward to September, you can see a completely different picture. You can see that our employees are now much more distributed, and as part of our growth, in which we grew from 380 people to 700 people in the organization globally, we also started to hire people far from our offices. We started to hire people across the whole US, from Louisiana to North Virginia and also Miami, but not only in the States. Also in South America, we hired people in Rio de Janeiro and in Sao Paulo. Also in Europe and in Australia, we started to hire people in Sydney and Melbourne. So we basically changed completely this distribution map of our employees, and we started to face and meet different challenges. It really was an accelerator for us to start and move from remote work to a distribution workforce. And basically, we transitioned from 5% remote employees that we had back then in February 2020 to 100% of our company working remotely overnight. And when you think about doing such a change, such a transition from 5% to 100% overnight, it really raises a question of what is the difference between having 5% of our employees working remotely versus now the whole organization working from their home remotely without having a centralized office to work from. And when I think about it, I really think, is it still remote work? Is having your organization 100% working remotely still counts as remote work? I have a clear answer for that. And for me, it's not anymore. Basically, we're seeing the world transitioning from remote work to a model of distributed work. And when you think about the differences, you need to start with defining what is remote work. Remote work is a discipline for the individual worker that refers to a group of employees which are not working in a centralized office. For example, before the COVID-19 crisis, a survey done by 451 Research showed that 2/3 of the people in the US worked from their home at least some of the time, but only 13% of them did so all of the time. So working remotely was familiar to the organizations globally, but it wasn't a discipline that everyone followed. Majority of the organizations were still very much like Monday, centralizing the workforce in their offices. When the whole pandemic started, we saw a huge transition to distributed work. Basically, as part of supporting the pandemic, lots of organizations started to send their employees to work from home and move to a distributed work discipline. What does it mean, distributed work discipline? Distributed work discipline is a discipline in which the entire organization and the employees regularly work from multiple different locations and not in a centralized office anymore. So it's a method in which we started to think in a distributed way. We start to hire people far from our offices. We start to manage them and think about logistically about our organization more distributed. And there's no anymore one central hub as an office that serves the company as the headquarters. The transition from an office-based organization with 5% remote workers that we had back in February 2020 to a full distributed workforce where monday.com is right now, again due to the COVID, really created a new reality. And when you look on that reality, you think about the challenges that comes now for organizations when they need to face with such a transition. And it's not only Monday. It's every organization out there now need to think about how he faces challenges around moving his employees from a more office-based work to a more distributed work. And the first challenge that I was thinking about was the operational one. Moving your whole entire organization from central offices to remote workstations in which we need to start and think about each one of our employees. How we can create a work environment in his own house is just a different mindset than having or serving one office in which we need to take care of the equipment, the workstation, what's the environment and flexibility that we give to our employees, and it's just a different mindset that we have to really think about as leaders. The second one, it relates to the operationals, but it's really giving the infrastructure to our organization to keep the same level of professionalism we had before the COVID started and before we moved to distributed work. We really want to maintain the professional level of the company. And when you think about processes like onboarding, training, making sure that the customer get the first-in-class service, it's a really different methodology that you need to implement when you're doing it when you onboard employees remotely. The third one, which is probably straightforward, it's the social impact of that. Think about your employees moving from more in-person interactions, doing those chat in the hallways, the coffee break, the cigarette break that they used to have in their office, and now they all move virtually. All of them are distributed. They don't see their employees anymore, their friends, their colleagues anymore. And we need to start thinking about how we can provide and create those virtual meetings for them so they will be able to create the same level of relationship that they used to have when they were working from the office. It's a big challenge for every organization, and as leaders, we really need to think about how we address that. And the last one, the last maybe challenge, it's not the really last one, but for me, it's one of the top ones, which connects all the other dots that I just talked about. It's the cultural one. When you start to hire people globally, you basically start to create an omni-culture organization. And there's lots of upsides to that because you're really diversifying the people, the culture, the countries that you have in the organization, but also you start to basically break the company culture that you created. So as an organization, as leaders, as managers, as employees, we really need to think about how we can remain that culture, save the company culture that we created, while really open it to omni-culture organization. Now, looking at all of those challenges, those top 4 challenges, I thought it will make sense to connect my session for today with how monday.com transitioned seamlessly in a COVID time and in a transitioning time, using our leadership principles that help our teams to be very autonomous and keep executing and perform in a transition time like COVID. And when you think about those principles, I really think about a pyramid of 3 base principles that as a company we implemented period to the COVID-19, and they really help us to transition from 5% remote workers to 100% remote workers overnight. And the very base of it, the very base of the pyramid, is transparency. Transparency for Monday is not only a principle, it's a value. We build our whole company based on transparency, and I think that many of the organizations are trying to create it today, but they really think about what it means in practice. When you think about what transparency means, for us, the first and foremost will be make data accessible to everyone. Transparency for monday.com means making all information, from numbers to roadmaps, plans, challenges, and even concerns, accessible to everyone in the organization. In monday.com, the very last employee of the company can see the same data that our CEO can really see and get access to, because we believe anyone and everyone in the organization is smart enough to take this data and use it to drive the company to success. Maybe a good example and a sentence that presents our culture will be a quote given by Avishai Avrahami, which is one of the earliest investors of monday.com, but also the CEO of Wix.com. And he said, "When you hide information from your team, you limit their intelligence to that of your own, crippling the smart people you hired." Think about it, crippling the smart people you hired. And that's not what we want to do. We want to make data accessible to everyone, so the smart people that we are hiring will be able to use it and drive the company for success. The second one, which is connected, and a practice that you can implement in your organization, will be documenting everything. For me, documentation is a key. When you start to onboard employees globally in different places, think about, the one guy that you just hired in Australia, and now he needs to onboard to the company. Connect to the processes and the challenges that we have as a company. Once it's all documented in one platform, it really makes it easier for him to align with the company way of doing things, and also contribute quickly and seamlessly without having to spend time on meetings, syncs, and any sharing knowledge kind of meeting. The last one is maybe simple, but I think it's very powerful. Tell the whole truth. Put things on the table. I always say to my team, when it's bad, let's put it on the table. Let's talk about the challenges and make sure that we think about solutions. When it's good, let's celebrate. Let's celebrate success together as friends. Once you tell the whole truth and everything is on the table, you really can create a transparency culture that will lead your organization to success. Connecting from transparency, I want to move to the second principle. And without having transparency as a base, we won't be able to create innovation in our organization. Now, innovation is something that, if you will go to any TED session, you will see people talking about how we can create innovation in our organization. And I think that when I try to break down what it means in practice for Monday, I really came up with those 3 stuff. The first one was the SaaS stack that we're using. And my recommendation for any other leader is give your team the best products out there. From video conferencing to work management platforms to instant messaging platforms and apps, really think about how your teams can have the tool to work seamlessly wherever they are and even they are apart. One good example for that will be Gong.io. Gong.io is an Israeli startup focusing on speech analytics for salespeople. And as a sales leader, it really gives me the ability to make sure that my salespeople and my partners really keep the same level of professionalism that I expect them to do with their customer to really ensure best-in-class service and journey to our customers. Another thing that is really vital in the new world and the new transition that we're doing is rethinking our processes. When you think about any process that you have in your organization, probably we will have to adjust it and think how we can make it more relevant to a distributed work style. Think about from, again, onboarding your employees to any type of meeting or weekly sync. It needs to be readjusted to really help your employees to fulfill that process while they are remote. And the last one that will connect you, those two, the last and probably the most important one, which is really hard to implement, is hiring and innovative people. And a way to maybe implement such a discipline will be adding a question to your interview like, what was the most innovative thing that you initiated in the last organization that was outside of your role description? When you ask that type of question, you can really understand if a candidate that is joining your organization from remote now really will be the next one to bring an impact, really will be the next one to drive innovation and change your organization to push us for success. While innovation, it's probably, one of the most important things of what we are doing and how we think as leaders, I think that the spur in the top of the pyramid will be execution. And the way to drive execution will be extreme ownership. Extreme ownership, it's a discipline and a method which is based on a book, which, by the way, I'm a big fan of, written by two ex-Navy SEALs officers, in which they are sharing their principles, their leadership principles, that really lead their Navy SEALs teams to success in very hard and complex combats. And as a former commander, and also today a business leader, I really think it completely relates to the practices of creating extreme ownership, which are execution first. How you can make sure that your people, the one that you hire, we just talked about hiring the most innovative people, they really drive execution. Each one of them needs to be the leader. And if you really train the team and think about how you can push them for extreme ownership in which they can be the CEO of their region, you can really drive execution. And the way to measure it will be giving specific KPIs, making sure that the goals are aligned, and that you measure really success of your team on those KPIs, and if you don't meet them, you really rethink and think about the challenges to make sure that you can execute and help the company drive the growth and success that you expect it to drive. Now, in order to get to that execution level, you really need to build trust. And building trust across your organization, across your team, it starts from the very simple and easy things that you can think about. Make sure that everyone can express his opinion. There is no stupid question. Anyone can really consult with, from C-level to manager to really say what he thinks about a specific process and give his idea. Once you enable such a level of discussion, once you give everyone a voice in the room, you really create the trust that will lead and help you create the execution. Now, having those execution and trust in place will connect to our last part, in which I will probably end my presentation. When you move and transition to work, remotely for the entire organization, you really want to make sure you keep the recognition and the sense of belonging across the team, even when you work remote, even when the team is apart. So you can recognize and share the success of the execution through the trust that you've built in the organization. And for me, maybe that example will be a great way to show it. When you will get into our offices in Tel Aviv and New York, right away you will see a big gong in the entrance, which we are using to celebrate any type of success. From a great deal that we're closing, from a customer that gave us a great feedback, to any maybe product enhancement that we're doing. The one that was leading that project is able to celebrate the success with hitting the gong and let everyone in the building know that we had a great success that's worth mentioning. When we transitioned the organization and when we started to move from working in the office to remote work, we really thought as leaders how we can remain this culture of celebrating success with our team and people which are now really apart. So what we did, we sent mini gongs to each one of our employees directly to their home. So they got a special delivery in which they got a gong that enables them to really celebrate in the same way that they did before the COVID started, when we were in the office. And we started to build a culture in which you can celebrate success and share a video or during a virtual meeting, the gong that you hit once you want to celebrate such an accomplishment. And maybe instead of speaking about it, let me just show you a few examples. So here you can see a great example of one of our, team members celebrating with his dog, with his mini gong, in his apartment. And, what we did around sending those mini gongs really created a crazy trend in Monday that basically created a new culture that we didn't imagine that, will be created once we send those gongs. And I think that the next movie really shows what we created and how we really created a new culture, also when we are apart, to celebrate success together.
Let's go. Warner Media, 300K plus accounts, 80K added ARR, 1,500 users. Let's do this.
And that's a celebration to me. When we can really connect everyone together, all the team members, even when they are apart. These guys didn't meet each other for probably more than 7 months in New York due to the lockdown. We really were able to connect them to our goal, to celebrate success together. And I think that's what leadership in COVID times it's all about. So I would love to finish my speak with a great quote from Extreme Ownership, the book that I just referred to, that for me represents how leaders should think about building their teams nowadays. The leader bears full responsibility for explaining the strategic mission, developing the tactics, and securing the training and resources to enable the team to properly and successfully execute the mission. For me, that sentence summarizes our responsibility as leaders to build transparent, innovative, and extreme ownership teams in a world that is always and dynamically transitioning to a fully distributed workplace. So when you guys are going to meet the challenges of moving your centralized office, centralized team to a distributed workforce, think about those leadership principles. Think about how you can make your team innovative, transparent, and really executing through extreme ownership. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.